bill, or one drafted along these lines, is what is so urgently needed now. I beg to move.
Yeah. The question is that this bill be now read a second time.
My Lords, it's normally a pleasure to rise to speak in your Lordship's house on sport. Today, a sadness. A sadness because we shouldn't need this bill. We shouldn't need this debate. Football should have sorted access at stadia long ago. I speak today merely as a peer and for no other organisation. Let's consider some of the facts. Earlier this year, the Premier League was officially declared the richest football league on the planet. Some of the best players in the world play in the English Premier League, and it's broadcast right around the globe. This is a great British success story. It's a fabulous brand, a fabulous broadcast, and a fabulous export. Such sadness is amplified by the almost complete lack of ability to sort it when it comes to access. The reasons, many, but not that varied. Too old stadia, too difficult. But let's consider a different league, perhaps. We all know who raised the Premier League trophy earlier this year. The teams that got their places in the Champions League. But let's consider the league table that ranks the Premier League clubs on their provision of accessible seating. Does that mirror, roughly, how the teams finished on their points on the park? My Lords, it does not. Only 3 Premier League clubs meet those minimum standards, which were agreed by the task force in 1998, which the Premier League were part of, and put into the 2003 guide. Only 3 clubs: Swansea, Bournemouth, Leicester City. The Emirates is impressive at 96%. Great progress has been made by Manchester City. But what about some of the other big guns? In the top 5? No. In the top 10? No. Chelsea in 12th spot, Liverpool in 15th spot, Manchester United in 16th spot. If we measured clubs on the provision of accessible seating, these clubs wouldn't not only be winning a place in Europe, they'd be looking dangerously close to the drop zone. And the excuses: too old, impossible, much too difficult. My Lords, I went to a Cambridge college that had buildings that dated back to the 15th century. Those buildings were made accessible, and yet it's too difficult for some of the richest football clubs on the planet to make their stadia accessible. My Lords, too old. Tranmere Rovers, firmly, completely committed to disability access. Are they a club awash with funds? My Lords, at the end of this season, they were relegated from the Football League, and yet their commitment to disability access and to want to be a leader in this area holds true. Perhaps it's a new stadia. Perhaps that makes it easier for them. My Lords, Prenton Park, 1912. It's hats off to Mark Palios and the leadership he shows there, demonstrating what can be done. It's not a question of the age of the stadia, it's a question of leadership. There's an incredible lack of leadership, a vacuum in this space from the Premier League, from the chairman, from the chief executives of the clubs. And when you have a leadership vacuum, pernicious forces step in. The Premier League handbook, which is binding on all clubs, has one line on disability access, Rule K34. The clubs must provide sufficient and adequate facilities for disabled supporters. One line. My Lords, there are pages on the provisions for the media. This shows the lack of leadership when it comes to disability access. Inevitably, where there's a lack of leadership, as I say, pernicious forces step in. You see it at Liverpool early this season, where disabled fans were verbally abused and received death threats when they tried to just simply want to see what was going on the pitch. At Manchester United, an 80-year-old gentleman had his walking stick taken off him. A man in his 20s who had a cast on his foot had his crutches taken away. I was fortunate to see the police statement on those incidents. The statement said it was extraordinary and astounding, the behaviour of the stewards. My lords, I don't seek to blame the stewards necessarily. I'd be very interested to understand what diversity and inclusion training they'd received. At Chelsea, a fan, too scared to give his name, said he was told he would just have to wait till 2022 for the new stadium for more seats to arrive. This is constantly being pushed into the long grass. For far too long, disability access and discrimination has tarnished football. If progress isn't made, I believe sponsors should consider their connection, their relationship to football, and how that fits with their ethical state. I believe what we see is nothing short of shambolic. Feeble excuses, be gone. They've been used far too long. The Premier League has been in existence for over 20 years, and yet we don't have even minimal access for fans. And yet, when it comes to new cameras, media positions, the changes are made in a trice. So-called old grounds have been rebuilt from the inside out, with new media positions, new commentary booths, new VIP and hospitality facilities, and yet when it comes to disability access, too difficult. Far too long, my lords, and yet my Cambridge College could make 15th century buildings accessible. Today, I'm going to write to the sponsors of the Premier League and the broadcast partners to suggest to them that if there isn't considerable progress so far, I think we can describe it as glacial progress. If there isn't progress in this area, they should consider their relationship with football and how that fits with their ethical state in the market. These sponsors, these broadcasters, brilliant brands, fabulous market leaders, great corporate social responsibility programmes. How does football fit with that? I'd like to ask my noble friend the Minister two questions. Firstly, in her previous business life, if one of her stores said we can only admit 3 wheelchair users per day, what her response to that would be. Secondly, will the government support this bill and end this iniquity once and for all? If they won't, will she work with the Secretary of State to bring legislation forward at the first possible opportunity to put this situation right? My lords, whether it's the FIFA debacle, casual sexism, or the national disgrace of disability access, the need has never been greater for football to discover its moral compass. My lords, it's our national sport, and yet for far too long, the beautiful game for many disabled spectators has been an ugly, ugly experience.
Yeah.